One of the great things about it was working with the Scottish Recovery Consortium, and over to my pal Michaela Jones, who's going to talk about SRC's work in this publication.
Great, thanks, Eric. As you say, we next up, and the last of our formal speakers, although I've got several other people I'd like to call on informally as we go through the discussion. But the last of our formal speakers is indeed Michaela Jones, who is part of the Scottish Recovery Consortium. She's one of their lived experience officers, and you may know that she's the force behind the Into Recovery Daily News, which is a very useful collection of news and views in relation to addiction and recovery. But Michaela, we're very interested to hear what you have to say about this. Thanks.
First of all, I do apologise for the dogs barking in the background. For some reason, they the minute I go on Zoom, they decide that there's something interesting in the garden. So first of all, I will obviously talk about the alcohol guidelines, but I want to also talk a little bit about Eric, who I am privileged, I guess, to call a friend as well as a colleague. We actually met way back near the beginning of my recovery journey when I ran a website called Wired Into Recovery, which some of you may know. And I came across Eric because he'd made a stand against the ACMD banning methadone, that they hadn't been given time to study the papers. That's when Eric worked for Mental UK. And that sort of struck me, as Eric is a person who, no matter how tough it gets, he does stick to his principles, and that's something I really, really admired. And Eric might not think this, but he's actually been an integral part of my recovery journey, largely because, as anybody out there with lived experience knows, it can be a real struggle for your voice to be heard. The door is more likely to be closed than it is to be open, and you often, and although it has improved greatly, you're often made to feel sort of lesser when you interact with professionals, although I would regard myself as a professional with lived experience. And I can say for a fact, actually, that Eric never, ever made me feel lesser. In fact, he made me really value the things that I learned along the way, and helped me to see the value of them. So Eric, I really, really thank you for that. And I also think it's quite interesting that, you know, I've always found my work in this sector, it's still quite a male-dominated society. There's not that many women's voices. And I think Eric's done a real power of good to get women's voices out there. You know, women suffer from alcohol too. And so much of the advice and guidance and things are predicated on the idea that it's white middle-class males. And in fact, you know, as Carol said, not everybody is a straight white male. You know, bringing that into the conversation. And we often suffer much more because we're not a straight white male, and some of the information isn't written for us. So, you know, I think those are massive things. I think first of all, just to have a voice on writing guidelines for the public was an amazing step forward. It does seem crazy that if you are writing to the public, that you don't have the voices of lived experience, you are the public inputting into that. And I think from Dying for a Drink, Stand Up and Tell Me Your Story, and the guidelines that are produced, having the voice of lived experience has given it that extra little edge that allows us to speak directly to the public in perhaps the way we haven't spoken before. I think the guidelines also recognise that perhaps the people who best know what to do about their alcohol problems are the people who have those alcohol problems themselves, that people do need advice and support to do it, but they're experts in their own condition. And to just not encourage, but just to say, carry on as you are, isn't good enough. That any major changes in life, yes, even the horrible pandemic, does present people an opportunity to change and to look at themselves, and people need the support to do that. And I think the guidelines really, really, really help with that. And I think, you know, Peter's saying how much have been downloaded. You know, it's not wrong to you're not necessarily putting people at risk by putting tools in their hands to enable them to understand and identify a path forward towards their own recovery, whatever that may be. I think it's quite interesting as well that the guidelines actually included references to recovery communities and mutual aid, because while frontline services shut down, in fact, the recovery community came into its own in the rooms. Obviously, a big fellowship site was up and running, but also recovery communities across Scotland made the transition to online support much quicker than any frontline services. And we are constantly hearing stories of people who found recovery in COVID-19 and found recovery via Zoom. So for me, those guidelines are not just about guidelines. They're a clarion call to say, let us not lack ambition in this sector. Let us trust that if we work together and allow everybody to have the information they need, then perhaps we start making those small steps to changing things. And it is, there are risks inherent in encouraging people to change their lives, but surely that's what we're all about. So it was really great to work with SHAAP, and I hope we'll continue to work with SHAAP. And it's been really positive to work with Eric. And I suppose the only message I've got is more please, more collaboration, more working together, more engaging everybody in this big conversation around alcohol, which will no doubt continue for years and years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I think it's entirely appropriate that the last official word from the speakers should indeed come from somebody in the recovery community. Thank you very much for providing that.